So let's talk about Connecticut's Home Rule. And if you think that sounds like some dry, dusty legal concept, I want you to think again. We're going to break it down into what it actually is. A really powerful toolkit that your town can use to have real local control.
But that brings up a huge question, right? Is local control in Connecticut just a myth? I mean, a lot of people have been led to believe that home rule is, well, pretty weak, maybe just symbolic, and that at the end of the day, the state really calls all the shots.
Well, let's put that common belief to the test. On one hand, you have the idea that it's weak and easily pushed aside. But on the other hand, you have the legal reality. And as we're about to see, the reality is that it's strong, it's constitutional, and it actually makes local authority the default rule, not the exception.
To really get to the bottom of this, here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll dismantle that home rule myth. Then we'll dive into the 4 legal pillars that are its foundation. We'll look at how those pillars protect local authority. We'll test that structure against some statewide policies. And finally, we'll open up your town's toolkit so you know exactly how to put all this into action.
Okay, first up, the home rule myth. We are going to dismantle this common misconception that local authority in Connecticut is just for show.
In this quote right here, it really gets to the very heart of the matter. This wasn't some accident. Connecticut's entire system of governance was deliberately designed to keep power at the local level by default. That idea is the starting point for everything else we're about to discuss.
So let's build on that. Now we're going to look at the actual foundation of this local authority. And I want you to think of it like a building, a strong structure built on 4 very distinct but interconnected legal pillars. All right, pillar number 1. This is the big one. Article 10th of the Connecticut Constitution itself. Now, this isn't just some regular law. It is baked right into the state's constitution. It was added back in 1965 after a whole lot of study, and it guarantees that local matters belong to local government. The state can only step in if it does so with what the courts call clear and unmistakable intent.
Now, pillar number 2 is the 1957 Home Rule Act. And this was a total game changer. It basically marked the birth of modern local governance in the state. Before this, towns constantly had to go hat in hand to the state legislature for permission. This act gave them the power to create their own rules, their own ordinances to protect public health, safety, and welfare. And that brings us to pillar 3, the Municipal Powers Act. You know, if the Home Rule Act gave towns the right to govern, this act gave them the actual tools. It grants all 169 towns what are known as police powers. That's the direct authority to regulate things like land use, zoning, density, public health. This is the day-to-day practical toolkit. And then there's Pillar 4, and this one is really unique to Connecticut. It's the Connecticut Environmental Protection Act, or CEPA for short. Think of this as a powerful right of intervention. It gives any resident or the town itself the ability to basically hit the pause button on a development project and force a mandatory environmental review. It is a crucial check and balance.
So we have these 4 pillars, but now let's look at how they all work together. Let's talk about the architecture of local authority. I want you to picture it just like this. You've got the 4 pillars, the Constitution, the Home Rule Act, municipal powers, and CEPA. Together, they hold up this strong roof of local land use authority. And what's the foundation they all rest on? It's the consistent findings of ACIR, which is the state's own advisory commission that has confirmed this very structure for decades. So what exactly is this structure protecting? Well, it's shielding the absolute core functions of local government. Things like your town's ability to set its own zoning rules, to create its own long-term plan for development, to meet its environmental duties under CEPA, and maybe most importantly, to base its decisions on local evidence and expert review. And look, don't just take my word for it. The state's own research body, that ACIR group, has repeatedly described Connecticut's towns as full-purpose local governments. Now, that's not the kind of language you use for something that's just symbolic. It signifies real power over local matters. Okay, so the theory sounds pretty solid, right? But how does this structure actually hold up in the real world when it's tested? Let's put it up against some recent statewide policies. Let's start with Public Act 251. I know there was a ton of fear that this law would force towns to change their zoning and basically nullify the power of local planning and zoning commissions. But if you actually look at what the law does, it creates reporting steps, new ways to measure things, and state incentives. It guides, but it doesn't command. And here is the legal bottom line, and this is so important. A regular state law, a statute, cannot just silently overrule a constitutional provision like Article 10. For the state to override local authority, the courts require that clear and unmistakable intent we talked about, and that language just isn't in PA 25-1. Home Rule is still fully intact.
Now let's tackle another big one, the Affordable Housing Act, also known as 830G. The common misconception here is that it just wipes out all local control and forces towns to approve absolutely anything. The legal reality, though, is a bit more nuanced. It shifts the burden of proof if a decision is appealed, which makes it harder for a town to defend a denial. But, and this is key, it does not override fundamental health, safety, or environmental laws like CEPA.
So this brings us to our final and maybe the most important section. We've talked about the theory, we've talked about the law. Now let's talk about putting it all into action with your town's toolkit.
And probably the sharpest tool in that whole kit is CEPA. It's truly one of the strongest tools a town has for protecting its land, its water, its air, its wildlife, and crucially, it applies to all development projects, whether it's an 830G application, a new solar farm, or a big subdivision.
So how does a town or even just a resident use it? You'd be surprised how simple it is. Step 1, you file something called a verified notice. It can literally be a single sentence. That one simple action legally triggers a mandatory review. And step 3 is where the real power is. It completely shifts the burden of proof. The developer now has the legal responsibility to prove their project will not cause unreasonable harm.
So let's bring it all home. What are the key takeaways here? Number 1, towns don't just have the right, they have a duty to govern local land use. 2, statewide laws provide guidance, not control. 3, zoning is a local power that can't be given away. 4, CEPA applies to everything. And finally, and most importantly, towns absolutely can reject proposals when there is real, concrete evidence to support a denial based on health, safety, or the environment.
I want to end on this really powerful idea. Home Rule in Connecticut is not some dusty old relic from a history book. It is a living, breathing constitutional protection that is absolutely relevant right here, right now.
So the Constitution, the laws, the courts, they all affirm that towns are the primary authority over their own land. The power is there. The structure is sound. The tools are in the box. Home Rule is a tool. The only real question left is, how will your community use it?